Hello, Year Nines. This is Mr. Vincent again. Hope you're well. I have some good news to share with you. In Term 5, Year 9 Science had the highest subject engagement in the whole school. 57% of Year 9 students completed their science work. That was impressive. However, 43% are still not engaging. Please, it's not about the statistics, it's about your education and your future. So please encourage your friends to engage and with the online lessons and complete the quizzes. Remember, science is a core subject in your GCSEs. You need science if you wish to go to university or to go to any other higher educational institution. You will need your 5 GCSEs, and science is one of them. So please make sure you engage with the work. And at the end of term 6, when we're looking at the data, I would like to say 90% of you or above, in fact, engaged with the online lessons. So please, congratulations for the 57%, but we can improve on that. We want to get 90% engagement minimum. Thank you. As with all other lessons, please pause the video now and have a go at these starter questions. Okay, I'll display the answers to the starter questions. Please pause the video to mark. Okay, in today's lesson, we're going to be looking at what is biodiversity. Now, there are 3 photographs here. The first one on the top left-hand corner with a waterfall is a waterfall within a tropical rainforest. The next picture on the right of that is a shallow coral reef. And then the bottom picture is a grassland with different flowers. Okay, so biodiversity simply means the different plants and animals that can be found in an ecosystem, the range, the variety of plants and animals, or we can say the variety of organisms within an ecosystem. I'll display the definitions now. Feel free to pause the video and write these definitions down. You're going to get a quiz question on this, so you need to know it. Please pause the video. There are several ways we can measure biodiversity. We can measure it in one of 3 ways. We can either measure biodiversity by looking at the different genes within the particular ecosystem, or we look at the different species within the ecosystem or the different habitats within the area, the ecosystem. So, genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is a measure of how many variations there are in the genetic code between individuals of a particular species or between different species. So we're looking, let's take for instance a particular species. So we're talking about apples. You go to the supermarket, you see apples which are all green and they're good to eat. And you see apples which are all red or yellow. They are also good to eat. It's just like on here now, we take, for instance, maize. You can have this reddish maize or dark red, kind of, and we can have the yellow maize. We can have a maize that is spotted between the red and the yellow, or we can have an all yellow maize, which is more common when you go to supermarkets, you find that. But these are the same maize plants, well, the same species of maize plants, but different types from the same species. Now, it's like we look on here, we have different types of jellyfish. They're all jellyfishes, but they're just different types of jellyfish. Or you take, for instance, dogs. You can have a brown dog, you can have a black dog, all black. You can have a black and white. You can have all white. You can have a light brown, a dark brown, different shades. You can even have a gray dog. So, yeah, they're all dogs, but different looks in terms of color. So the genetic code differs. Now, let's look at the other way we can measure diversity. We measure biodiversity using talking about species diversity. All the different organisms you can find in an ecosystem. It's the same like different plants and different flowers. That is species diversity. Yep. You can have a cow, you can have a horse, you can have a goat, you can have a chicken. They're different species. So we're talking about species diversity. The last type of diversity we want to talk about is habitat diversity. In habitat diversity, you can have different areas, right? You can have a woodland, you can have a grassland, you can have a forest, we can have an underground cave. So we want to compare and contrast the biodiversity of a tropical rainforest with the biodiversity of a polar region. Please pause the video and write down your thoughts. Okay, in a tropical rainforest, there are lots of animals that are organisms. Let me use the word organisms, so that includes both plants and animals. There are lots of plants and animals that will survive or thrive in a tropical rainforest. In the case of a polar region, the biodiversity will be very few or it will have a low biodiversity. So a tropical rainforest has a high biodiversity. It is very biodiverse, whereas a polar region has fewer species and are less biodiverse. So it has a low biodiversity. Hope you had these basics correct. Let's move on. Here are four statements made by some students. Some students talk about what biodiversity is. Joshua says it's the variety of different organisms in an area. Megan says it's the number of organisms in an area. Tyler says it's the variety of ecosystems in an area. And Tayan says it's the variety of species in an area. Who do you think is right? And you can choose more than one person if you think they're right. Have a go. Let's see who's right. We start with Megan. Megan says biodiversity is the number of organisms in an area. I think a lot of you will be frowning and shaking your head and saying, no, Megan is so correct, simply because that is technically the definition of a community. A community is the total number of organisms in an area. And this is the living part of the definition of an ecosystem. The non-living part is the habitat part. So Megan is really defining community, not defining biodiversity. Let's see what Tyler says. Tyler says it's the variety, use of a good word, variety, of ecosystems in an area. Now, Tyler is not quite correct because when we measure in diversity, biodiversity, we're measuring it in terms of genetics, in terms of species, in terms of habitat. Now, Tyler here is possibly confusing the word ecosystems with habitat. So it's not the variety of ecosystems in an area. You want to talk about the variety of habitats in an area. So, for instance, this part of Ashford, where I live, I can go towards the woods, I can get a woodland, but before approaching the woodland, there is a grassland where cattle graze. Sometimes we have pony there, we have cows, we have horses there, they graze there, or sheep even graze there. And then not too far away, we have a pond, a water pond where you can find a few ducks on there. So that is within this area, this ecosystem, we have those different habitats, a water, a pond, grassland, and then a woodland, which like I would want to say is like a forest, mini forest. So Tyler technically is not correct as well. Now let's go to Joshua. It says it's the variety of different organisms in an area. Now, This which Joshua has defined is referring to species. I think Joshua's definition is quite similar to Tayen's definition, and the two of them are partly correct. Okay, I hope you spotted that and you understand the little subtle differences in their definitions. Now let's move on. Pause the video and attempt this. Right, it says describe the biodiversity of this marine ecosystem. If you look at the photograph carefully, you can see big fishes and small fishes. You can see sea plants or what we call corals. So these should be in your answers. You can write them down. If you got these three or four things correct, you would have got your 2 marks. Normally, this is a 2-mark question in an exam. We move on. Now, I've been using the word species, but I don't think we've ever defined the word species. So let's take some time to look at what is a species or what does species means. It's a group of organisms that have the same characteristics, common characteristics. They have many characteristics in common, resemble each other, sometimes we say, or they look alike. So when we use the word resemble, it means they look alike. So the cat family, you take for instance the cat family, whether the big cats or the domestic cats, the cat family, they resemble each other and have many characteristics in common. So you take the lion, the leopard, the lynx, which you did with Mr. Shannon. You take the lynx, you take the tiger, all of them are in the cat family, right? The cheetah, all of them, they look alike. Now, the other thing about them, they can interbreed. That means amongst themselves they can breed. But I don't think a lion will breed with a goat. It will not happen. I don't think a dog will breed with a sheep. Within that specific species, they can interbreed. Outside it, no. And so when they breed, they can produce what we call fertile offspring. So when you're defining a species for an exam, these 3 points have to be there. They have characteristics in common, they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Please pause the video and answer this question. The first one says, members of a species have many characteristics in common. Yes, so all the members of a species live together in the same place. No, that's false. It's not important. Members of the same species can breed to make fertile offspring. Yes, they can. And members of different species cannot breed to make fertile offspring. Of course, as long as they're different species, it's like a cow and a goat breeding. It cannot happen. Good. Hope you had all of them correct. Let's move on to the next. Please pause the video, read the statements of each of these students, and then discuss it first of all with your family or your siblings. Or if you're working with a friend, discuss it with your friend, and then we'll talk about this later. Please pause. Now, Connor says all the members of a species live together in the same place. In fact, Connor is totally wrong. They don't. Freya says members of different species can breed to make fertile offspring. Freya is also wrong because members of different species cannot breed to make fertile offspring. Yep. And then George says, I disagree with Freya. He says, if organisms can breed to make fertile offspring, they must be of the same species. George is correct. That is 1 point of the definition of a species. What does Amelia say? Amelia says members of the same species look similar. Yes, they should resemble each other or have characteristics in common. So Amelia has 1 point. George has 1 point. Let's see what Zoe says. The characteristics of species stay the same forever. Zoe is wrong. So Amelia has 1 point of the definition of a species. George has 1 point. So we just need to remember. Well, George actually has 2 points because he says if organisms can breed to make fertile offerings, they must be of the same species. So you're going to remember the 3 points of a species. One, they have characteristics in common or they resemble each other or they look similar. Two, they can breed amongst themselves and to breed to produce fertile offspring. 3. Hope you had all of those points right. Thank you. We proceed. Now, I want to talk, I've mentioned about high biodiversity when we talked about the tropical rainforest, and low biodiversity when we talked about the polar regions, or probably mention again a desert has a low biodiversity. Now, so let's see, why is it important to have a high biodiversity? It is important because that gives you a wide variation of food sources. So it reduces the dependence of a particular species on a particular food source. The second reason is it provides us with food, medicine, the atmosphere, and water. Remember these points. You're going to be asked, why is high biodiversity important? So, examples of areas with high biodiversity, we have tropical rainforest and shallow tropical coral reefs. You've seen photographs of the two earlier. So in a tropical rainforest, we have a vast number of plants and animals. In a shallow coral reef as well, we have a variety of sea plants and fishes, and everything looks so colorful and beautiful. Right. Now, this is what I said in my last video to you guys when we were talking about the only topics we'll be able to cover. This is a topic which has two required practicals in it, and they are the sampling methods we use in ecology. The sampling methods, the first one is a quadrat. I'll show you what a quadrat is. It's a square frame of a known area, most times 0.25 meters squared, that is used for sampling the abundance and distribution of slow or non-moving organisms. So slow organisms like snails, or non-moving organisms like plants, flowers, if you want to check the distribution. We normally practice or do that practical in the car park area. This is what a quadrat will look like. The squares, we mainly do random sampling with a quadrat. You just chalk the quadrat. Where it falls, you count the number of flowers. If it's daisy we are looking at, you count the number of daisies. If it's dandelions we are looking at, you count the number of dandelions. You do it at random, then you can use that to estimate, because it is very much impossible for anybody to walk on a field and say you're going to count every single daisy or every single flower, or you choose whatever the organism is that you want to find the population of in that area. It's impossible to count every single one of them in a field. If it's a tree are quite large, it's easy to count. You can count the number of cows in a field, you can count the number of goats, sheep. Those are different. But if you want to talk about plants like these flowers, that is impossible. So we use quadrat, a method of random sampling, to estimate the population of a particular organism in an area. So you can do it in the random manner, which is like the picture on the right, or you can do it in a systematic way, which is the picture on the left. Now, the next method is, remember, I'll ask you to, before we move on to the next slide, I'll ask you to research about quadrats, please. Yeah. Now, the next method required practical, you need to know sampling method is transect. Transect is a line, for instance, with a tape measure along which sampling occurs, and I'll show you. That is transect. They're doing transect by the seashore. You can see the tape measure on the ground, and they'll place in this case, they place the quadrats at specific points to do this. So in terms of, in the case of transects, you're actually doing a systematic sampling. It's not random. Now, this is transect being used on the surface of a water. So you check in the I would say this is like a pond or a river. They're looking at a riverbed and doing a transect there. The guy still holds a pen and a notepad in his hand. Let's move on. Again, before we move on, try to research about transects, how it's done. There are YouTube videos you can look. Free science lesson online will help you to get that, or you can go to BBC Bite Size. Okay, here are some questions for you to answer. Please pause the video and attempt these questions. Okay, here are the answers. Please pause the video and mark. Okay, a few students who've sent to some message to say they've completed the work and they'll like something extra to do. So please go to BBC Bite Size, you choose secondary, CSC. Of course, we're talking about England because when you open BBC Bite Size, it will, and you go to all Bite Size. When you choose the subject, it will begin to ask you whether England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, or Wales. So, of course, we are England, and then you choose the rest. We go into secondary, GCSE, combined science. EQA trilogy is what we're doing at Folkestone, and then biology, you choose ecology, and you go on to organization of an ecosystem. So, but you can study any of the topics under ecology. We're going to be doing all of those topics now this time. So feel free to read and try or complete the quizzes at the back. And you'll find out that most of the questions on there are the questions we use as well in our quizzes. So good luck with that. Okay, you've finished this unit now. Please move on and complete the quiz. Thank you.